Okay, so let's get started. Hi everyone, my name is Nimrod Geva and I manage the QuizCom product group. And today I'm going to speak about one of our tools, which is called DataView Tools for SharePoint and SharePoint Online. Before I start, just a few words about QuizCom. We've been developing add-ons for SharePoint on-premises since 2005, and today we're developing and providing both add-ons for SharePoint and apps for SharePoint Online and Teams. We operate from Richmond Hill in Canada, and that's it. So today I'm going to speak about DataView Tools for SharePoint. And DataView Tools for SharePoint, it's actually a set of multiple web parts that all do quite the same thing. They retrieve data and then display it in various ways. We're trying to answer really most of the common scenarios. So it's kind of a super flexible framework for aggregating and displaying data. DataView Tools for SharePoint supports both SharePoint Online, SharePoint 2019, and Teams. So what do we have in this DataView toolset? So we have all kinds of web parts, as you can see in this slide. So for example, the List View Plus connects to any local or remote list and then displays the data in various ways. List Aggregator can aggregate data from multiple sites and site collections, but also can aggregate data from Azure Active Directory or from OneDrive, so all kinds of sources. And same way you have the org chart and Calendar Plus, both are also aggregators that get data from various sources and display it in various ways. We have upcoming the charts web part as well. And on top of all these web parts, we have a superset web part, which is called DataView Plus. DataView Plus includes all our data sources and all the display options. And I'll show you many examples. An additional web part that we've just added last month is the DataView Shared Filter. And this answers a very common dashboard scenario where you have multiple DataView web parts on the page, each connected to a different source. And you need some global filters that will be connected to multiple web parts on the page. So I'd just like to show you some examples and then start from scratch and show you how we configure these web parts to really answer all kinds of scenarios. So in this screenshot, you see the list aggregator connected to Azure Active Directory, for example, or to OneDrive. We use Graph API data source to connect to these sources. Another example is the org chart, which can be connected, for example, to Azure Active Directory or SharePoint Profile Service, as well as SharePoint lists. You can see that here the layout is completely different. I have custom filters, and I also grouped my org charts by department. So I have multiple tabs. Each tab will display a different department. Same goes for the picture gallery web part. It can connect to one library, or it can aggregate pictures from multiple sites according to various conditions, and can also display custom filters. I mentioned the dashboard scenario. So in this screenshot, for example, you see two web parts. This is kind of an EPM dashboard, Enterprise Project Management dashboard, where I see aggregated milestones from multiple project subsites. So I see milestones from many subsites grouped by their priority. And I see also a team calendar, which may also aggregate events from multiple sites. And here I'm filtering by a global filter, which is shows only billable items. And this filter is mapped or connected to different columns in these two web parts. So in the left web part, you see that this checkbox is actually connected to the is payment column, while in the team calendar, it's connected to the payment column. So this way you can create global filters mapped to different data source columns. I didn't mention, but all the DataView Plus web parts are based on the SPFX and Microsoft Fluent UI technologies, which means they're fully responsive. And that's why I took this screenshot to show you that they really look great, and it's very important if you want to display these dashboards or KPIs for people who are using handheld devices. My last example before I start configuring the product is the DataView Plus, which includes, in addition to all the controls that I showed you, calendar and the table controls and org chart, we also have a custom control. And a custom control can display whatever you want. For example, on the left side, you see here a risk matrix, or it's also called probability impact matrix. And this is a custom HTML connected to a data source. So you can use any custom HTML, like, for example, a floor plan, which is connected to one of our data sources. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is start from scratch and show you how I add an example web part to the page connected to a data source, and then show you some of the options to change the layout of the web part and have the exact component and the exact layout that you want. And then I'm going to show you many live demos of different scenarios with these different web parts. So here I have an empty page, okay, and a modern page, of course, and I'm going to add the DataView Plus to the page. Okay, once you add the DataView Plus, first thing you need to do is connect it to a data source, okay? So I have a ready to use data source that I want to use. So I'll just copy it from here. Yeah, okay, sorry for that. Okay, so to add a data source, let me just move this slide from here. Okay, so you click here the configure data source button, or you can click here on the configure data source on the left, and it opens this data source pop-up. And a web part can connect to one or more data sources. Of course, I'll show you some examples of overlay of data sources. So I'm going to connect to a list, a remote list from another site collection. So I'm going to just give this data source a name. So I'm going to connect to a list called event budget, I think. So I'll just give, it doesn't have to be the same name. I'll give it the same name. And then I pick the data source type. And here you can see the types of data sources that we support. So you can connect your DataView Plus to Excel file, to Graph API. Graph API allows us to connect to any Microsoft 365 resource. It can be, as you can see here, Azure Active Directory, Exchange Online, OneDrive, Planner, any one of these Microsoft 365 sources. You can connect to SharePoint user profile, to a SharePoint list, to a SharePoint list aggregator, and to SharePoint search. And I'll talk about the differences between them. I'm going to connect to a SharePoint list in this case. And the list can be on the current site, but it can also be on a different site. So I just copied the URL of a different site. And now I'm going to select the list that I want to connect to. It's called event budget request. And I can also filter it by some list view, but I'm just gonna select the all items view. And that's about it. I'm gonna close this. Of course, I can connect to additional data sources, but currently I'm gonna leave it as is. And this is let me make it a bit bigger. This is the out-of-the-box display. So what you see here is, this is the data, and in some default display, and you see that we have all kind of controls on the page. Like we have a menu bar control showing some default menus, folders control, paging control, list control, which displays the actual data and has some item actions that you have here, paging control, and another menu control allowing to add a new item. This is just the default display. And now you can play with this, same as you do with Lego. So you can add, remove any of these controls and decide exactly how you want to display your data. So I'm going to start with changing the display control from list to a table control. And I would like to have some grouping here. So I'm going to add the groups or tabs control. I'm going to get back to the page, and I would like to group my table here by city. So I want to see each city's events in a different tab. So I'm just going to drag the city column to the tabs control. And as you can see now, we have a tab per city. And same way I can group by any other column that I would like to group by, okay? Next thing I'd like to do, let's add some other controls. And of course, sorry, when you have these controls, you can also configure each of these controls. It has its own gear icon. So if I want to configure the tabs control, you have the group by. And if you switch to advanced mode, usually when you switch to advanced mode, we expose more properties that are less commonly used. So we don't want to overwhelm the user with too many properties. So here you can also change the way the tabs are rendered, for example, or if you want to use large captions. And also you can control the exact tab text. By default, it shows the title of the tab plus the number of items that you have under this tab. So this is a function that you can change it, okay, with our text editor. Okay, another example, let's get rid of this tab control. And instead, I would like to, sorry, let's switch to simple mode. And instead of the tab control, I'm just disabling it, I'd like to add the search or the filter control, which allows end users to filter the display. And I can add any custom filters that I want. By default, we just show the textual search, which searches all the columns. But I can add other filters. Let's filter by budget. And also let's filter by event date. And of course, you can add any other column. And I'm clicking publish to see the result. So now I have this table and I have these filters. And for example, let's see the budgets. I want to filter to see only events which their budget exceeds $20,000. Okay, so I have this, because it's a numeric field, I have a slider control. So let's take this. Okay, and I can also filter by date. So let's filter by some date range. So I want to see only events that start on 2021. Okay, so I can go here and start my range. Let's start from January until July. Okay, and let's get rid of this filter. Okay, so we have one event. It's not $20,000, so that's why it wasn't shown until I removed the budget filter. So this one takes place in this date range, okay? And of course, you don't have just have to select ranges. In any of the filters, you can select selected options or multiple selected options, or maybe all except selected options. So you really have all the flexibility to configure this filter. You can also save the filter as an end user. And you can also save the filter as the admin. If you save the filter as the admin, you can save it for all the other users if you want all users to have some default field. Okay. Another option that I'd like to show you is conditional formatting. You can highlight items here according to various rules. So going back here to the top of the web part, I'm going to add the conditional formatting control. Okay. And let's highlight the more expensive events. So let's highlight the ones that, again, exceed $20,000. So I have here the conditional formatting control that I just added. Let's add a new rule. And I want to display $1. No, I don't have this icon. Maybe I have a money icon. Yeah, I want to display this icon, black over yellow background. And let's call this rule high cost. And I want to apply this formatting only to the budget column, not to the entire row. And let's set the conditions. So I want to highlight events that their budget is greater than 20,000. And let's click Save and Close. Okay. So, and let's republish. Okay, so I have my items highlighted according to conditional formatting rules. And I have this legend which allows me to switch on or off, meaning hide or show back the items that this rule applies to. Okay. In addition, you have these item actions. They are also completely customizable. By default, we display these 4, but you can remove them or add alternatives. For example, this one shows the item view. You can send by email or edit, the standard actions that we thought are most common. But what I tried to show you so far is how you work with the data view. So you connect it to some data source, and then you play, add, remove, and configure these controls, which fully affect the way you display things. Of course, I didn't do it, but in the table control, you have full control over which exact columns are displayed and other settings. You can also switch to a list view that displays in a more mobile-friendly view, and so on. But what I wanted to show now is the concept of the display. Okay, so once we cover the basics, the configuration basics, I wanted to go over some examples, some very common examples. And first example that I want to show you is the EPM dashboard, which typically in an EPM dashboard, you aggregate project items such as milestones and tasks from multiple project sites or subsites. It depends on your structure. Some organization create a subsite for each project, some create a site collection for each project. It doesn't matter. We need some high-level dashboard that will show management the important stuff, like upcoming billable milestones or delayed milestones and tasks and so on. So I created this example, and I'd like to show you how it's configured. So I have here my upcoming tasks, and I grouped the tasks by their status, and I also created custom filters here by priority and assigned to, and I have the export custom menu that I created, and I also have some conditional formatting. I created a delayed tasks web part that shows that only the delayed ones, and also created the rules that highlights in red the ones that are really delayed, like over 5 days. I have here the completed billable milestones, and again created some rule for the ones that have large amount of money in these milestones, and also upcoming milestones. Okay. The thing which is joined to all these web parts is that I'm using not the list data source, which I showed you just now, which connects to a single list. Here I'm doing dynamic aggregation. Dynamic aggregation means that I don't know how many project subsites or project sites I have. It's dynamic. Project sites may be added once a week, once a month, and I don't want to have to reconfigure this dashboard every time a new project site is added. So I need a dynamic way to aggregate my information from all these project sites. So let me show you how it's configured. Okay, so I'll start with this upcoming tasks web part. Let's go and see how the data source, how its data source is configured. So as you can see here in the data source type, this time it's not list data source, it's SharePoint list aggregator. Now, SharePoint list aggregator actually runs a query on multiple sites and subsites and this and so on. So how do you define this query? The way you define the query is that you simply select a list view which will be used as a query definition. If you look at a regular list view, regardless of the data that you have in that list, just look at the view. A view actually defines a query because it defines the columns that you want to display, the sorting order of the data, the filter criteria of the data, and also grouping. So looking from this point, a list view is actually a query definition. And this is the first thing we ask you to configure for the SharePoint list aggregator data source. Simply select a view. We don't care about the data in that list, just the view that we will use as a query on the target sites and subsites and so on. So in this case, I selected the upcoming view in a task list, which is actually empty in my top level site. The next thing that you have to configure is your aggregation scopes. Aggregation scopes are the target sites and subsites on which this query definition is going to be executed. So I have one aggregation scope, which I called project task. Let's see how I configured it. So the aggregation scope is of a specific site and subsites, and it includes all the subsites below this root. So QA/aggregator. So all the subsites below will be aggregated, and I don't care if I have 10 subsites or 100 subsites. It's dynamic. And then you have additional properties that further limit the aggregation scope. So I'm going to aggregate not all the lists that I find in these subsites, but only lists that their name is team tasks. And also, I'm not going to aggregate data from all the subsites that I find, only from subsites that their name starts with sub something. Okay, sub project 1, sub project 2, sub something. And also, I'm going to aggregate only lists of type task, and I can also limit it by content. Okay, so all these properties together define a target aggregation scope. And we're going to run this list view, which is a query definition, against this aggregation scope. And this is how you get all the upcoming tests from all these project subsets. Okay, so this is one use of the aggregator data source, and you can see exactly the same thing in all the other web parts. So if I go here to completed billable web part, you'll see that I'm using the same type of data source, SharePoint list aggregator, but I'm using a different query, a different list view, which is used for my aggregation. So this time I'm using a different list and list view. And my aggregation scope is actually quite the same. I'm just running the query actually I'm running it on all the sites, all the subsites, but I'm looking for different things, for milestones this time. Okay, now I mentioned before in the opening of this session that many times in such dashboard sites, you need global filters. Although I showed you that I can have a filter in each of these web parts, like here, you see I have, no, here I didn't include any, yeah, I included here a filter in this web part. But what if I want to filter multiple web parts in this dashboard by some filters? So at the top here, you can see I have a shared filter. And this is another web part where I can add filters that will affect all the web parts below. So I added two filters. One is called employee, and the other is called show only billable items. And when you have this global filter or shared filter on the page, you can connect it to each of the other web parts. For example, if I go to upcoming tasks web part and I go to its data source, you'll see here that I have this switch here, filter items using the shared filter, okay? And you can switch it on or off. Once it's on, you need to decide which column in the data source will be affected by these filters. So the employee global filter is connected to the assigned to column, and the billable global filter is not connected to anything in this web part. And same thing, I connected these shared filters in each of these web parts to different columns. So if now let's unhide this web part. I hide it, I hid it in the previous example because I didn't want you to see it. So now I want you to see how it works. Okay, so looking at, for example, you see these completed billable milestones are assigned to myself and QA user 2, and I have here many tasks assigned to all kind of users. So I'm going to filter by QuizCom support, for example. So once I select it, you see that I see only items that are related to QuizCom support. If I click here on this milestone, you'll see that it's assigned to QuizCom support, okay? And same here. So, and also I added this risks web part. It's also DataView Plus, and the risks that I see here are filtered. And I see only risks that their owner is QuizCom support. If I remove this filter, you'll see that all the web parts have their data because now they're not filtered. Okay, and same goes for show billable items. If I check it, all the web parts here will show only billable items. So this is how you connect. You can connect and create global filters that affect multiple DataView Plus web parts on the page. It doesn't matter to which data source they're connected or what they're displaying. they can display calendars, they can display lists or table, it doesn't matter. We can connect these filters to the data source columns that we want and filter multiple web parts on the page. Okay, so next I'm going to show you another example. Okay, and this time we're going to talk a bit about the org chart. And the org chart really supports tons of features and configuration options. I'm just going to show you really quick some very common options used with the org chart. So let's go to my second tenant here. Oh, sorry, I forgot to show you another example with the aggregator connecting to OneDrive. So here the data source is Graph API. If we'll have time, I'll go back to this one. I'm going to the company org chart. So org chart supports all common org chart features, such as all kind of layouts. You can style users here by rules, like by conditional formatting rules. For example, here I have two rules. Assistant is showing in blue, and the R&D department is showing in red. And I think you can imagine how I did it. I just used the conditional formatting control, and I'll show it to you in a minute. When you select any of the employees here, it will open the employee card showing and all the data that you see here, like these links, the communication ways like phone numbers and chat are all configurable. They're taken from the data source. If I click the view profile, I will see only the properties that I want to display here. This is part of the data source mapping that I'll show you in a minute. And you can also click here to see the hierarchy. So for every employee, you can see his peers and manager and staff. And of course, you can navigate through this card by just clicking the employee, and now you can see his hierarchy and so on. Okay, so this is typically a very common usage of the org chart. Of course, you can zoom in, zoom out, and export the org chart. So all of these are quite standard features, like export to PDF or to other formats. Now, let me show you how it's configured and what options we have here. Okay, so I'm editing the page. And as you might guess, I have here the conditional formatting with two rules. That's the reason why the assistant here has this formatting, the blue, and the R&D department. Let's look at the R&D department rule. So it's a very simple condition. If department is equal to R&D, and these are the selected colors. So it's white over red. Okay, so very, very simple. Let's look at the data source. So here I'm connected to a list data source. Looking at the column mapping, when you work with an org chart, you must map some of the fields which are mandatory for any org chart. So every org chart must have a name property which is displayed, position, manager. This is what creates the hierarchy. Every employee has a manager. Reports to is optional, and it enables you to have multiple managers. I think in this case, I have here an employee with two managers. Yes, if you look here at Dewey, Northrop, she has Brian as her manager, and you see another line goes directly to the CTO, to Elidia, because she also reports to Elidia. So we support multiple managers. Sometimes you have your professional manager and you'll report to another person. We have the picture, which is not mandatory, but you can use it, and phone columns and email columns. These are the columns that you saw when I clicked the employee card. You saw it in the employee card, okay? And now this org chart is connected to a single data source. I'll show you shortly what happens if I connect an org chart to multiple data sources, okay? So this is just one example. And by the way, in edit mode, you have a lot of control over this org chart. So for example, the reason you see 2 levels by default, yeah, this one I opened, but by default you saw 2 levels. And that's because I configured it this way. Orientation, you see top down, but we have all kind of orientation. Okay, you can have a left to right tree or many others. This layout is mixed, is optimized for space. It means that if the browser window grows or shrinks, the chart will adjust itself. This is the most common layout, but you can change it. We have all kind of templates. I'm using here the pencil template, but we really have all kind of templates that you can use. And then you can also have full control over what you see in the name and in the position property. By default, you see the name and the position, but it's not a must. You can use here this text formula editor and decide that you want to see not just the name, you want to see the name and insert other property like other column like department. So, okay, let's have some separator here between them. So you can have full control over what exactly is displayed for each employee here, okay? So here now you see the name and the department. It's not so nice, it's just an example. And let's revert it. So these are the basic properties. If you switch to advanced mode, you see some more properties that give you more control over the behavior of this org chart. And if you remember, when you clicked here an employee, you see these actions. So these also are fully configurable. We just give you by default these links to LinkedIn and Twitter and all this, but you can add or change this. And this is just JavaScript. You can use our snippets and you can add your own JavaScript. So this is really an open door to do some deeper customizations and add some functionality to the org chart, add custom actions here. And it's really, really flexible. Okay, another example that I wanted to show you with the same org chart is more of a company directory or a phone book. So here I'm not showing an org chart. It's connected to exactly the same data source, but I'm showing it completely differently. I'm showing it more like a table grouped by department, and I'm having many filters on top, so it will enable finding an employee. This is the main purpose of this company directory. And I changed the actions here. I added one called call employee, and this will use the application which is registered on my desktop for call, if it's Skype or Teams or whatever is registered on your or email employee. So these actions, as I explained, are totally customizable. You can do whatever you want. We provide these snippets, but you can add your own JavaScript code to do completely other things. Another example with the org chart is, I have 2 examples here. Here's one which is connected to the SharePoint profile service. Okay, I'm not connected to the list. This is a different data source type. And it's commonly used. You can connect to your organization hierarchy either directly by connecting to Azure Active Directory. This is through Graph API. This is most commonly done when you have SharePoint Online. When you have SharePoint 2019 and you work with this app, you won't connect to Azure Active Directory. You have your own local Active Directory, so you better connect to the SharePoint Profile service, which is synced with your Active Directory. So if I'm going here to my data source, you see that I'm using here SharePoint User Profile. Okay, so this is a different data source, and by default it starts with the current user. Here I wanted to show you a different example. Here I'm not showing the entire company or the current user hierarchy. I'm showing a specific department. So this is a filtered org chart. And the way I filtered it, you see, it starts with the R&D director. And it's the same data source. Yes, we have many more employees, but it shows just this employee and its staff. So the way I did it, I used the filter control to filter by R&D, and I saved it as an administrator. So this filter is saved for all the users, but I don't want the users to mess with this filter. I don't want them to change it. So I use the property that allows me to hide the filter from the users. I'm doing it if I'm going to the advanced settings. I have here a setting that says hide from users. So when I publish it, they won't see this filter. No one will see this filter. Only admin sees this filter in edit mode. You see, there's no filter here, and it shows you a filtered view of the org chart. Okay. Yes. One more thing that I wanted to say, another feature that I wanted to mention. I showed you a separate org chart, and then I showed you a separate phone book. But actually, you can have multiple web parts in one web part. And you do it by using display groups. A display group is rendered as a tab, okay? And it consists of a data source, one or more data source, and configured layout. And also you can target a display group to a target audience. So I can have multiple tabs here. One tab displays an org chart. The second one displays some list. The third one can display a document library or some aggregation over some list showing document. Disconnected, I can show multiple disconnected data sources with totally different layouts, all in the same web part, and some users see all the tabs and some users see only part of them. Just going to the edit mode to show you how it's configured. So when I go now here to the data source configuration, you see that I have two data sources. One is called profile service. It shows this org chart, by the way. And the second one is called employee placeholders. And I have two display groups. One displays a chart showing all data sources to everyone. And I have the phone book, which displays just the profile service data source to everyone in a different layout, in a list layout. So this way you can have multiple data sources, multiple display groups, all combined in one web page. Another thing that I wanted to show you here, and this is a common requirement from customers working with org chart. Many times you have job titles, but you don't have employees, actual employees, which are positioned in these job titles. So you have empty job titles which you want to display in your org chart, but there are no real employees occupying these job titles. These are like placeholders. How do you display them in the chart? Because these employees are not real employees. They do not exist in the Active Directory, but you want to display them here because you are going to recruit and have these employees very soon, okay? or maybe just temporarily you don't have anyone positioning this position. So anyway, the way you do it, you just overlay two data sources. So in this example, my real organization chart is based on my SharePoint profile service, and these two yellow ones are come from another data source, which is a list data source. I just prepared a list with 5 items that each one is a job title, not occupied currently, and I just have an overlay in this web part displaying these two data sources in one org chart. Okay, so this is another feature that you have with the org chart. Last thing I want to say about the org chart is that we also work with a lot of data. In this example, I'm connected to Azure Active Directory, and here I'm retrieving 5,000 items. When you work with Azure Active Directory and bring a lot of data, you need to use caching, and we have also caching setting. Otherwise, the first data retrieval might take time, and time depends on your bandwidth. Time depends if it's a good day or bad day with Microsoft 365. So it might take even, I don't know, 20 seconds, even 30 seconds I saw sometimes. So you need to set up caching, especially with Azure Active Directory. Okay, so that's about org chart. These are the examples that I have for org charts. I'm going forward to my next example, which is calendar, which is also very common. I have 10 minutes. Yeah, we covered all these. Okay, so the most basic requirement with calendars is, of course, overlay. To overlay, show an overlay display of multiple SharePoint calendar display calendars, or an overlay of calendar display and my personal Outlook, or maybe a group calendar. So all of these combinations are available with the calendar web part. And because we are using not just static aggregation like in SharePoint. In SharePoint, you can manually add multiple calendars, up to 10, I think. Because we are doing dynamic aggregation, you don't have to manually add. You can just configure a query, like I showed you, an aggregation query. You can aggregate not just 10, you can aggregate hundreds of calendars. By the way, if you noticed, I showed you two data sources. One was the aggregation data source, which I used. The other one is called SharePoint Search data source. Both do aggregation. The difference is that if you use the list aggregator data source, it's a lot simpler to configure. You just configure, you select a view, which is used as your aggregating query, and you configure target aggregation scopes, and that's it. The limitation of the list aggregator is that if you need to do cross-site collection or very big aggregations like that go over thousands of sites, it will reduce, the performance will reduce as the aggregation scope grows. When you work with SharePoint Search API data source, it is much faster and you can easily aggregate across your entire tenant. The downside of using the SharePoint Search data source is that you need first, that there's administration overhead here. You need to first properly configure managed properties, make sure your search is properly configured, so it's not so quickly configured by a non-admin user. You need to rely on IT to first configure search for you. Okay, so going to my example here. Yeah, so here, for example, I have, let's make the screen a bit bigger. So again, there's no new trick here. Here I have a calendar which aggregates events, and I used my tab control to group the events by a meeting room. Okay, and of course I have my custom filters above, and we have all the regular week, monthly, annual displays, and so on. And I also, using the category column, I configured some conditional formatting rules, so I can have different colors for different events, not just by their source. I can do that as well, but I can also create some dynamic conditions based on rules. So birthday will appear different than get together or meetings. Okay, so and of course you can switch on or off any type of event. This is with the legend control. Another example that I wanted to show you. Here I'm using the list aggregator. Okay, so I'm dynamically retrieving milestones, showing them in a calendar. Actually, it's the same milestone I showed you, the previous example. Now I'm simply showing them in a calendar. And again, I'm aggregating them using the list aggregator data source. And I configure different colors for different types of events. Here I'm using not the list aggregator, not the list aggregated data source, but the Graph API data source. This allows me to connect to Exchange Online to retrieve my personal Outlook, as you can see in this one. I can also connect to a shared folder in Exchange Online. And here I'm showing a daily view, an agenda view, sorry, of a group calendar. Okay, so I just want to show you what's different here in the data source settings. So you'll see this type of settings as well. So all these three web parts are connected to using the same data source. It's the Graph API data source. This is an example when Microsoft 365 works a bit slower. Just to switch to edit mode takes me a bit more time today. Okay, so looking at the big calendar here, which shows my personal Outlook. So you see, I configured some color coding, actually according to the same categories that you see in your Outlook. So I created rules for personal, meeting, and important categories. And looking at the data source, you see that here I'm using Graph. Yeah, I'm looking here. I'm using Graph API data source. And once you select the Graph API data source, we show you below here all the Graph API properties. Now we simply expose the Graph API properties. Now this is technical. Like what technical users do in this case, they go to the Graph Explorer site, and there you can just copy and paste the URLs for every type of resource. We provided examples. So if you're using a calendar web part, you will see these examples. If you're using the org chart web part, you'll see different examples. Okay, so I use the first one called My Calendar. Once I select it, it updates all these property values for me. Of course, I can change them. I can select more columns to bring or change the filter statement and so on. I'm not doing it, but usually this is customized by IT people who connect to Azure Active Directory. So yeah, they use the filter and advanced filter options to get exactly what they want from Active Directory, because many times Active Directory is messed up. It's filled with non-user data, dummy data, inactive users, and so on. So they do use these features to get exactly what they want from Active Directory. Next thing to do is to configure the column mapping. So again, for a calendar, there are some properties that you must have in every calendar. Like every event has a subject, location, start date, end date, and so on. So you need to map the data source columns to your calendar properties. You can also have color coding per source. but I configured color coding per type of event. So you can do both. It's up to you. The column display settings is where I configure the exact order of columns that you see here when you click an item. So you have full control over what exactly is displayed when you click the item. Okay. Additional properties of the calendar control, I think they're basic, like your start view, which exact view you allow the user to use. Like here I configured monthly, weekly, and daily. So you can have more, we have annual, agenda, and so on. If you want to show only business days, what tooltip will be displayed when you hover over an event. When you switch to advanced mode, you have many more properties, like what should happen when you click. You can switch to edit mode. You can maybe start a call with the organizer. You can do whatever you want. We provide our snippets, but you can change them. And you have full control what is displayed for every event. You can add second line, third line, and so on. So this is about this calendar. Going to the group calendar, for example, it's quite the same thing. It's just that it's a different example that I use here. So you have group calendar, and then it will render a bit of a different URL here. Again, I'm not so educated with this technical issue, with this technical, like how to exactly write this property, and that's why we provide this example, so you won't have to do it either. But again, you can do it. You can change this graph path and other properties if you want to get something very specific. Okay, with the few minutes that I have left, let's see. Yeah, I wanted to mention some more, one more thing. I'll skip the custom control. Just keep in mind that besides calendars, org charts, and all lists and tables, you can also have your own custom layout using your own HTML. Last thing that I'd like to mention is that all DataView web parts work inside Teams. And that's because these are SPFX web parts. And all you have to do if you want to have your calendar, org chart, or any DataView web part inside Teams is just go to your tenant catalog where you deployed the DataView Tools package, as you see here. And when you select it, you just need to click the Sync to Teams button. Okay, this is an SPFX feature. It's not our feature. And once you sync it to Teams, that's it. It's available. And when you go to your Teams and add a new tab, you will see that DataView Plus is available as one of the applications for this tab. And once you add it, you will see the regular DataView Plus. You can select the exact web part that you want to display, and then you can configure it. Okay, so I think I covered most of the things. DataView Plus is available for free trial on our website. You just go to Microsoft 365 apps menu, and then to data visualization tools, and you'll see all these SPFX web parts. You can also try the DataView Plus as well as all other Quizcom apps on our sandbox. You just need to go to our website, and you'll have a ask for a sandbox menu there. Just fill the details, and we'll create a sandbox for you so you can play with the product and evaluate it on our sandbox without installing it. That's it. Actually, it's exactly 1 hour. So